welcome you to the weekly BW Education Wednesday Wisdom. I, along with my colleague Vasudha Mukherjee, who's the editorial lead on BW Education, do this every Wednesday for the last 18 months. Today we have a very relevant guest whose name is all about what we do, what we aspire to give to our ecosystem, and she has nurtured a big learning and educational ecosystem and grown the legacy that her father left for her. So let me introduce, without any further ado, Dr. Vidya Yerodkar, Pro-Chancellor, Symbiosis University, today to this BW Education Wednesday Wisdom. As is in her name, she's Dr. Vidya. Vidya is the goddess of Saraswati. If learning happens, if the goddess Saraswati is in our life, the goddess Lakshmi automatically comes. And goddess Lakshmi and goddess Saraswati are about abundance in all aspects. But let us focus on education today. And let me start by asking Dr. Vidya my first question. Dr. Vidya, first of all, welcome to this BW Education Wednesday Wisdom that me and Vasudha have been doing for months. And we are particularly delighted to have you today in the show because I haven't seen you in many shows. So I'm glad that we at BW Business World and BW Education are speaking to you. Welcome. And I'd like to start by asking you, how have been the last 18 months for you, both personally and professionally?
So first of all, Dr. Anurag, thank you very much for inviting me to this show because, it's nice to interact with a larger audience through your medium. So the last 18 months, for everybody, I think it's been personally, at a personal level, yes, it is a new normal. And at a professional level for our university and several other universities and colleges in India, it has been a huge change of what we would do from what we were doing before 2020 to what we are doing right now. And I'm sure in the next few questions and our conversation, I'll highlight on this. But I think what we all have done is more of introspection, looking at whether what we were doing was right and what we are now doing, is it the way forward or, is it going to be our new normal or is it really going to change? So I think this question arises in the minds of every person, not just in our own country, but globally.
Absolutely. And Dr. Vidya, the word that is being used is hybrid, blended when it comes to education and learning. Now, I interact with a lot of students and the students are very keen to come back to campuses where the campuses haven't opened. In some places, the campuses have opened. So not only the teachers are used to imparting education in a way that they do real interaction, the way they're able to hold the attention of the students, and more importantly, to do meaningful, mindful Q&A, discussion. Now, do you see this blended form of learning staying here for a long time, or at some stage when we have dealt with Corona, we'll be back to a traditional way of learning in a classroom, but we'll use technology tools to be able to do some things that can save time and be more efficient? What's your view? Since you are helming a large educational ecosystem and a large university, what is your view as the leader of that?
So Anuragji, actually, if we take ourselves back to March of 2020, when we were hit by COVID-19, it came like a sudden shock to each one of us at the university. So first of all, managing students, ensuring the safety and taking, sending them back home in a safe condition. So that was one big challenge because most of our campuses are residential campuses. Many of our institutions were right in the examination period at that time, and therefore to suddenly send students out of while they were undergoing examination was a huge challenge because there was a lot of panic amongst parents, students, etc. The second challenge was switching over to online. I mean, though we used to use technology and our teachers were used to using technology in classrooms, but it wasn't like 100% technology, 100% online. And therefore, to suddenly switch on to that mode, which was totally new, was something that was very, very challenging to each and every teacher. And I think the more challenge was in assessments and evaluation, because that was something that probably now none of us had ever done. I'm so happy with our teachers. I'm sure all university administrators would be happy with their teachers. the way they adapted to this, this new online education was phenomenal. But after that, I think 2 months, that the lockdown period that we got, really helped us, because we did a lot of capacity building, teacher training, etc. And when things opened up, in the sense, not opened up for students, but opened up in the sense where teachers could come into the university campuses with very low capacity, 10%, 20%, be as it may, they got the support of the university, and then it was absolutely seamless online education. They could also find different ways of pedagogy. The way they taught, it wasn't like the way we are teaching now, I mean, interacting now. Like, there were different platforms that they used, different techniques of pedagogy that they used, and they made all the classes very, very interesting. Otherwise, speaking in front of a blank screen, sometimes it's absolutely challenging, because you are used to seeing students, their faces, their reactions, their discussions in classrooms, and suddenly here you have a screen with full of faces, and you don't know whom you're talking to, and so on. But I think the way they adapted was absolutely beautiful. And then, of course, the phase of opening up of campuses for staff members. So at least there was peer interaction among staff members. I'm talking about Pune city and Maharashtra specifically, though we have campuses all across the country. But here, when we got the permission to open up for 50% and then close to 100%, it was a much better situation, because finally, like you talk about peer-to-peer learning among students, it's equally important for even staff members to be amongst their own colleagues, learning from each other, and so on. So that happened, and now we're just desperately waiting for students to come back, because students are writing to us left, right, and center. It's those with just 2 years of program, like the MBA and MSc students. They've already lost a whole year, more than a year, in fact 1.5 years, and they would be almost finishing the second year also, and they are the ones who really want to experience the campus. And so we are struggling, talking to the government of Maharashtra, saying that at least those who are vaccinated, allow them to join campuses. We'll take care of them. We'll create a bubble. I'm just hoping and keeping my fingers crossed, Anuragji, that we get a positive answer from them, and we hope that students will also come back. And then after that, there will be this new phase, as you really call it, as blended learning. Because while there will be students on campus, I don't know how many of them can really sit in the class like they did earlier. So maybe a class size of 60 can just accommodate 30 students, because you'll have to have all the safety norms being maintained. And our university is a health promoting university. We're the first ones to have a hospital that treated close to 5,000 plus COVID patients, the first ones to have the vaccination drive initiated in Pune city. So with all this, we know that we'll need to maintain all the safety measures, and therefore we'll probably have 50% class sitting in class, and 50% which will be online. So the challenge is that. So the challenge will be both in delivering asynchronous and synchronous modes of teaching. So that's exactly what we are now working on. We're working on a situation where, imagine 50% of the students get to sit in a class, and 50% have to be sitting in their hostel rooms and listening to the same lecture online. This is fine in a synchronous mode, but what happens in an asynchronous mode, where we give recorded lectures to our students, and so on. So that's something that we are working on, but I'm sure we'll find a solution to this very soon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vidya Yerodkar, for being so honest and authentic in sharing what is happening with universities and the whole ecosystem. Now, let me bring in another dimension. I've been asking, I know your campus of Symbiosis International University is a beautiful campus, invested in infrastructure, and it matters in education. Infrastructure matters, great faculty matters, and every aspect of learning matters, placement matters. But now let me ask Dr. Vidya, do you think in the future, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, there will be a university that will be on the cloud? And I'm not talking of a picturesque location, but a virtual university. Do you think that is a possibility over the next 3 to 5 years? I'm not talking today.
So Anuragji, I'm a great proponent of use of technology for education. But for me, this kind of virtual university or a university on cloud scares me, because I believe that students, for students, it's not just about learning a particular subject or gaining knowledge, but it's much more than this. I mean, what a university does is transforms lives of these young men and women, and this transformation actually happens when people are on the university campus. They interact with their peers, they interact with teachers, other staff members. They are in an environment of diversity where students from different states, different countries, are there sitting with them in the classrooms, or eating their food in the cafeteria. So that kind of learning is essential. I mean, see, otherwise, otherwise people would have just moved on to creating virtual universities and getting those degrees from virtual universities. But I always believe, Anuragji, that there is a great amount of learning beyond classrooms. And I think for each one of us, I'm sure you have experienced it, and all of us have experienced this, that so much of our personality is built by so many other things than what we've learned in classrooms. And while teachers are excellent, I mean, they kind of deliver absolutely innovative knowledge, which is really not found on Google and other, other technological interfaces. But again, the amount of learning that happens while you are on a college campus or on a university campus, that I think, we need to give as much importance as what we would give to just, imparting knowledge. So I am not a proponent of a virtual university. That can be an alternative. I would rather be a proponent of blended education, because while, just face to face may not be possible in a country like ours, to create and increase the gross enrollment ratio to what we envision, to say 30, and then of course 50, which is what the NEP talks about. I think virtual education is of course the solution. But then, more than just virtual or online education, I think let's talk about blended education and have these interfaces and interactions for as much possible time as it is possible for universities and colleges to do. So imagine a situation where you have a conventional university. Let's take an example of Symbiosis. You have this beautiful campus of 300 plus acres in Pune, and you have interactions of students from different disciplines on this campus. You have medical students interacting with engineering students, and you have media students, and photography students, and management students, and liberal arts, and so on. So imagine these kind of interactions, which can never happen in a virtual university. And therefore, if you have a university campus that is supported by technology, looking at the way blended education is going to see the light of the day, that's the way forward. And I would always propose this way forward than just a university on the cloud.
Thank you, Dr. Vidya, for that authentic response. I genuinely believe what you said, that student development and learning, of course, placement is an important part of the journey, but learning is equally important. And that happens through on-campus experiences, real-life experiences. I went to an engineering school, I went to a business school. Whatever I am today has been shaped by my experiences on the campus, and not just, being in an educational course, but my interactions as peer-to-peer learning, my interactions with my professors, interactions with my batchmates, interactions with the industry in a real-time way, face-to-face. Now, let me also shift focus to technology. You said you're a big proponent of using technology in education. EduTech was growing even before Corona, but in the last 18 months, EduTech companies and EduTech platforms have taken off in a big way. What is your response to EduTech supplementing education? I'm of the firm belief, at least for now, they cannot replace at least 5-10 years. They can only supplement learning, right? So what is your view on the EduTech platforms and this EduTech revolution that is happening in this country?
So Anuragji, as you very rightly said, that I am also a firm believer of EduTech supporting conventional education, and I'm very glad to see so many companies having come up suddenly. So we had heard about Khan Academy, but now you see Byju's, and the way Byju's is growing phenomenally, so much so that you even see them supporting cricket matches, which means that they're really doing well. Apart from that, of course, you have UpGrad and UN Academy and so many others, and Coursera, which Coursera, edX, all these platforms which are already there, but now you see their importance far more than what you saw about it before. I mean, I remember the leaders from Coursera coming and knocking our doors and saying that you need to have this platform to support your students, when a few years ago we actually gave a deaf ear and we said no, we are not interested, because we have enough and more faculty to impart knowledge and deliver education. But now we've signed off with Coursera on campus, and the kind of support that we get through this EduTech company is phenomenal, because you have knowledge coming from across the globe. I think the biggest advantage of EduTech support is that a teacher from Yale, from Stanford, from whichever university in Germany and France now comes into the classroom of a college campus or a university campus, which wouldn't probably dream of having a foreign professor coming and teaching. For example, Symbiosis, as you know, we've been way ahead in internationalization of higher education. I've been a strong proponent, researcher. I push internationalization of higher education as a concept. I pushed it. I'm very glad that it has been included in the national education policy, and we've had several interactions with Dr. Kasturi Rangan on this, and I'm glad that this is happening now. But if you look at how many universities really had foreign teachers coming and teaching? And I don't say that you need to have a lot of foreign teachers coming and teaching, but the diversity of knowledge that they bring in from another part of the globe is very important. And I think our students who are now would be global citizens need to know what's happening in Africa, what's happening in another part of the world, and therefore the importance of foreign teachers actually teaching alongside Indian teachers. So this whole concept of collaborative online international learning and so on and so forth is, you can actually experience all this right now. And thanks to the EduTech companies like Coursera, edX, and several others that have brought, this kind of learning into the classroom. So I would say that this should continue. In fact, more and more EduTech companies are coming up. I only pray that, the quality is maintained, so that, it's not just about numbers that we talk about, but it's really about the quality of education that they bring in. And support our conventional system. So a wonderful, I would say, marriage between EduTech and conventional, education is the way forward. And I fully support this kind of, supplementation by the EdTech companies that are actually coming forth and supporting all of us.
Good. I think there is some synchronicity of thought. I'm a failed educationist. I did start a media school, but I shut it after 5 years because my partner passed away. But in those 5 years, it gave me some glimpse of how you can build institutions and what not to do when you're building institutions. So I agree, both as an observer, as a parent, and having been the recipient of good education in India. I fully agree with your views. Let me ask you my last question before I bring in Ms. Vasudha Mukherjee. Dr. Vidya, a lot has been said about the new education policy, that it is complete, it is holistic. You talk about Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and he is now in heaven, but he's for a fantastic document. How do we ensure its implementation? And what do you think should be the first upfront?
So, see, the National Education Policy 2020 that was launched on 29th July in 2020, I think it has brought in a whole revolution in the Indian, I would say, not just higher education, but even school education. After 34 years, we saw a very progressive education policy, an education policy that was more consultative. The amount of stakeholder consultation, more than 200,000 stakeholders were consulted, right from not just academics, academia, students, support staff, but even people who came from non-academic backgrounds, the industry, Gram Panchayat leaders, etc. So it's a very, very holistic policy. It's a policy that you feel belongs to each one of us. For me, while I chaired the FICCI Higher Education Committee that I still chair, we work very closely with Dr. Kasturi Rangan. We gave a lot of our inputs. We had created a FICCI 2030 policy document, which we also submitted to the MHRD then and to this committee. And therefore, we saw that a lot of things that we were discussing and all of us as educationists wanted to implement has actually been, kind of architectured into this new education policy. It's a very progressive, very thoughtful policy. There are two parts, of course, and I don't need to elaborate. I'm sure the audience and you all know about it. But the school education part, and that's something so exciting, that you're moving from a 10 plus 2 to a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. And as a medical doctor myself, and as an educationist, I believe that early childhood development that happens in those first 5 years is so very important, that you see so much of research that has been done, that the kind of inputs that you give to a small child at kindergarten and standard 1 and 2 definitely shapes up personalities of these young children. And therefore, to have a foundation, they call it as a foundation program, which is the kindergarten and standard 1 and 2. So those 5 years, then the next 3 years of standard 3, 4 and 5, which is called preparatory, then the next 3 years of 6th, 7th and 8th standard, which is called the middle school, and then they've clubbed 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. And that's so correct, because the junior colleges unnecessarily were placed with senior colleges, and that's not right. That's the high school, where actually it's a preparation for your career. And most of us in India do our preparations in standard 11 when it's too late. I mean, you should start doing that preparation right from standard 9. And therefore, you need 4 years of preparation to decide your careers, because that's what is going to shape your lives, your destiny. And I am so very happy with this, the way they've shaped up an architecture, the school education. When you come to higher education, I'm happy that they just don't talk about skill-based education and employment and so on, but they talk about more of a liberal education. And I think if we really want to produce leaders, Anuragji, in our country, what we need is liberal education. And I mean, you may call it liberal arts education, you may call it liberal education, be as it may, you cannot have a tunnel view of just one discipline. I'm a medical doctor by training. Okay, I was trained at the BJ Medical College here in Pune, the government medical college. Then I did my law. Then I did my PhD in higher education, specifically internationalization. Now, because of Symbiosis, the kind of diverse knowledge that I got, I'm sure my personality and the so-called leadership skills that I may have imbibed are because of this kind of environment and this kind of diverse knowledge, or I would say interdisciplinary knowledge. Now, if you can give this at an undergraduate level to a student, where engineering students do learn, many other disciplines and not just stick to a tunnel view of, the technical knowledge, and that's when leadership gets developed. And you need thought leaders for the society. You can't just have people who are employable and just work like machines in the industry, but you need that kind of holistic view. You need people who are culturally sensitive. You need people who you can, say that we have turned them into global citizens. And so this whole liberal education that the NEP talks about is so, so heartening. The other part of NEP that I like is on internationalization, the kind of importance that has been given, the kind of, not just about mobility of students, it's not just about attracting foreign students to India, but more importantly, the kind of collaborations, the synergy that they're talking about is something that excites me. A new concept of internationalization at home. So, what do you do with students who cannot travel abroad? How do you bring in internationalization into your curriculum, into the university campuses? That is something, again, that the NEP has spoken about. And I think the most important part, I would say, is on teacher training. I mean, while we had ignored our teachers, whether it was school teachers or college or university teachers, now with the kind of impetus, that this is going to bring in the NEP 2020, each university will have to have a teaching learning resource center that Symbiosis has been having for the last almost, I would say, 20 years. And we give a lot of importance within our university to teacher training. I mean, there's a huge fund which we have created for every teacher to just take in either the faculty development programs in our university or outside of, anywhere. Because you need to invest, because they are the ones who are actually going to shape young men and women who come to your campus. So I would, I've always appreciated the efforts of Dr. Kasturirangan and his team. And I would urge to every listener here that just don't read the 64-page document of the NEP, which has come out as a policy document. Read the draft document, it's amazing. And it went through 2 committees, and probably 3 ministers. So that was the seriousness of the NEP, and I would applaud our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji for taking this and launching it himself, because that's the importance that is being given to education now. And I think that which means that our country is definitely moving in the right direction. And last thing about NEP, Anuragji, is that I would like to say is that it has really created ripples. It's not just that we discuss NEP in India, we discuss NEP even on global forums. I mean, you probably must have seen me at various webinars talking about NEP with some of my foreign academia friends, and they are more interested. So imagine a policy that can be probably adopted by other countries. I mean, that's the reach of our NEP 2020, and I'm very happy and optimistic about it. The UGC has framed 8 different committees. The MHRD gave the task to the University Grants Commission. 8 different committees have already submitted their reports to the to the MHRD, now the Ministry of Education, and they will now implement. Fortunately, I was also a member of the implementation committee of the committee formed for global outreach or internationalization, and we've also submitted our report. Apart from that, you see every day in the newspapers the state governments, because education being a state subject as well, so most of the state governments have formulated committees at the state level also to see this implementation. So it has really created a lot of excitement all over our country.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vidya. I can say we need leaders and doers like you to be able to create the right kind of talent with the right kind of learning, with the human sensitivity. And Dr. Vidya, I keep saying that we now operate in a 3C world post-corona, a compassionate world, a contactless world, and a collaborative world. So we have to imagine education also in this 3C world. But at this stage, let me bring in my editorial colleague, Ms. Vasudha Mukherjee, into the conversation to take the next leg of this BW Education Wednesday Wisdom. You're watching Dr. Vidya, you're the Pro-Chancellor of the Symbiosis International University, talking to BW Education and BW Education. Vasudha, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Batra, and thank you, Dr. Vidya, for joining us today and coming to speak to us on this platform. Now, when I was researching you, I was so I was smiling the entire time, because you truly do embody all the things all the principles that Symbiosis University stands on, and even all these things that NEP 2020 talks about, especially with multidisciplinary education, internationalization. I mean, your own history of doing a medical degree, law, and PhD, and then in higher education. And during a time when probably this was not, it's still not very common, frankly, to have that much diversity in one's own education. So I would like to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about your educational journey? And what were you thinking when you were going through all these different degrees and courses? Were you pursuing what felt right at the time, or was there a bigger plan?
So actually, Vasudha, thank you for asking me this question, because this question was never asked to me ever before. But let me take you through my own personal journey. So during our times, and not during your times, you're far, far younger than me, and Anurag ji will agree with me that there were two disciplines that students wanted to pursue, either engineering or medicine. Right. So first of all, if you were intelligent, you took science as your stream. Right. So then that defined your intelligence. So parents would say that, okay, if you've got 90%, you have to take science. There was no question of taking any other
Absolutely.
stream. And so therefore you went to science. Then if you went to science, then there were two streams, engineering or medicine. And for boys, it was more of engineering. For girls, it was medicine. That was almost a norm in every family. But for me, it wasn't that. For me, it was my own passion to become a doctor. And I always wanted to do that even from my childhood. And my parents never ever, both of them are highly educated, and they never put any pressure on me or my sister to do this or that. And I had decided to become a doctor, and therefore, obviously I took science and I got good marks, and therefore, obviously I went to a government medical college, and I was pretty highly ranked even during the admission process. And I got into BJ Medical College. Even when I got the admission, my father, who is the creator of Symbiosis, he thinks totally differently and always thinks out of the box. And imagine thinking about this I must have passed out my 12th in 1981. And when I got admission, and I still remember that incident, he was reading his newspaper in the morning. And I ran to him and I said, you know what, my name is there up on the merit list of the BJ Medical College. And so I'm going to go there this morning, and I want to confirm my admission. And he just brought down that newspaper and said, are you sure you want to continue medicine? I think you should do arts. I think you're more cut out to something like an IAS or becoming, or joining the foreign services. You should have a holistic education. Again, you want to be into that, very restricted medical education. Imagine a man thinking about this in the early 80s. Thinking about how arts can be more of a liberal education that will bring out my personality better than what a medical career would do. When I look back, I realize that these are great visionaries who think so differently, and that's how the whole creation of Symbiosis on a totally different motto and mission and vision is what he has done. But nevertheless, coming back, so I pursued medicine. obviously after third MBBS you get good marks, and then I was very passionate about obstetrics and gynecology, so I got that. For 3 years I did that, and I did my MD in OBGY, started my own hospital in Pune city, and then destiny, defined something else totally. And therefore, when my husband wanted to pursue his higher education after his MD, like FRCS, we have MRCOG in OBGY, we decided to move to the West. But nobody had money at that time to go and, directly to go to London and give the exam and stay there. By then I had, two lovely kids. It was impossible. So the step was for all of us in our generation to go move to the Gulf. So we went to Oman, a beautiful place where I worked with the Ministry of Health, me and my husband. And then, of course, he could go to London from there and give his exams. And we moved in also to UK for just a very short stint. But what we observed in this little country, Vasudha, was phenomenal. The healthcare system over there is amazing. Not that it's a very progressive country or very highly educated country. In fact, there are a lot of tribal people who live there still. But the health management system is phenomenal. It's supported by the government like any other any other public healthcare system. Excellent quality healthcare being provided. More importantly, an emphasis on preventive healthcare. So much so that if an immunization dose, a polio dose of a child is missed by a mother, the hospital would take care to ensure that the child is brought to the hospital to give that polio dose or a tetanus toxoid vaccine to a pregnant lady. That was the the commitment on the part of the people who are managing the healthcare system. And I always felt as a doctor that why can't we bring this in India? I mean, imagine the maternal mortality or the mortality amongst young children, neonatal mortality was so high in India, it still is high. And why can't we bring this, in India? And why can't we do such things in India? India was too large for me to think, and therefore I felt that my father had by then the organization had grown pretty large, and I felt we have a couple of thousand students. Can we bring this healthcare management system into Symbiosis? And that's how my professional journey with Symbiosis started, by establishing a Symbiosis Center for Healthcare with a focus on preventive, promotive, and curative healthcare on every campus of Symbiosis. And we now, of course, that's been converted into a large 900-bedded hospital with the whole university being a health promoting university. But be as it may, that's how my professional journey started. And then exactly, this was in the early 2000. I came back in 1998, 99. And that's the time when my father had applied for Symbiosis to become a university, a deemed to be university. And I would see he was working so hard making that proposal, going to Delhi, meeting up with people. And sometimes I would accompany him. And I got kind of swayed into this higher education then. The whole interest of, looking at what education is all about. How do you shape lives of all these young children who come and study with you? That's when I actually got an insight into school education and higher education, more importantly, higher education. And then, of course, it was no looking back. And from healthcare, I moved into higher education. But I did law that time because, Vasudha, I felt that if you are at the helm of affairs, managing an institution or an organization of any kind, whether it's a business house, a university, or anything, I think the knowledge in law is very, very important, because then you look at things totally differently. And anyways, as a medico, I was very studious. I always liked to study, research, and so on. So I did my LLB with Pune University here, and I did it while I was working. And the kind of insights that I got, and I'm sure my knowledge really broadened because I did law. And then I got into being a member on the University Grants Commission, looking at various ways the way higher education through the policy making bodies looked at. And so I think Symbiosis gave me a wonderful platform. Then I, of course, started, because Symbiosis was born for foreign students. My father established Symbiosis for international students way back in 1971, a small organization that was born in our house for the welfare of foreign students, because my father was a foreign students advisor. He was a teacher of botany in Ferguson College, and he was also the rector of the boys hostel and a foreign students advisor. There were international offices on every university campus. So Pune University had appointed him. And when he saw the discrimination, the problems of all these Afro-Asian students, he decided to establish Symbiosis, a botanical term, which means living together of two different organisms for their mutual benefit. So with a large motto of, a holistic motto of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, he wanted to bring Indian and foreign students together to promote international understanding and brotherhood. And therefore, internationalization, I would say it's in the DNA of each one of us, at Symbiosis, in our family. And that's how when I moved into higher education, I started doing more and more research of what India does in this space. And I realized that there's very less work done by our country when there is a huge potential. You had Takshashila and Nalanda, thousands of years ago, these two wonderful universities that brought in so many foreign students and scholars. But what are we doing now? And that's when I started researching on this topic. And of course, because of UGC and, other committees that I could contribute to even policy making. And I'm glad that, I did. And then someone told me that, you have so much of knowledge, you publish research papers. And then I realized that why can't I actually do my doctoral studies in this area? And I took 4 years to complete my PhD. But yes, all my Delhi trips helped me. 2 hours of flight, from Pune to Delhi and back, which means 4 hours. I could just concentrate and study and, do my research in peace. And I'm thankful that I could manage to even complete my PhD in this area. And I published a book on internationalization of higher education in India, published by SAGE, and that's a book that has been used by several governments, not just ours, but in Australia, even the Stanford University Library has this book. So it's been one of the most referred books on Indian higher education.
Wow, that is an incredible journey. Can I just say that? Also, like working on an airplane, I have motion sickness, so traveling time is just completely useless for me. Like I can't do anything while I'm traveling anywhere. So that's one thing that really stuck out. But I also, like you mentioned, internationalization of education, and that is such an interesting concept because I think so many people, and I'm glad you really mentioned like the Afro-Asian community, because I think people have a bit of a misconception when you say internationalization. They seem to think more about Western, maybe, yes, UK Caucasian population. And did you ever face that while you were studying this, or you message around the campus and university in your book?
So Vasudha, I think your questions are not very clear because of maybe you have a bandwidth.
Yeah, I'm having a bandwidth issue. My bad, it only started now. When Dr. Batra was speaking, there was no issue. So what I was asking is
the question that you're asking me is on internationalization of higher education, the concept, and whether it means just Afro-Asian students and their issues that we have dealt with in Symbiosis, or internationalization generally means, the developed world and, collaborations with...
Yeah, what people perceive it as, and what are some misconceptions we have about it.
Okay, so internationalization is a concept which has been discussed far and wide for several hundreds of years. I mean, there are various definitions of internationalization of higher education, but I think more importantly, what people, perceive internationalization as student mobility, which means how many foreign students are there in your university, in your country, how many of Indian students go abroad. So, this whole mobility concept is what internationalization means to many people. But internationalization, Vasudha, is far beyond, having foreign students on your campus, or, how many students do you send to foreign universities. It's far beyond that. And I mean, if you ask me what is the larger picture of internationalization, I think it's to create global citizenship, to create people who are sensitive to different cultures. And I think in this world of today, it's so very important to believe that our age-old concept of, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, believing that the whole world is one family, believing that geographical boundaries were created by men and women, they are notional, believing that, there are no such boundaries between countries, but the whole world is one big family. So to bring in this cultural sensitization, to bring in diversity into your classrooms, to bring in diverse discussions into your classrooms, and to be inclusive and not really exclude those that you feel can be excluded, is the larger concept of internationalization. So how do you bring in this whole change in mindset of people to understand cultures of different countries, different people, to be sensitive to their needs and their different cultures? and to be, you know, the whole concept of Udara Charitanam to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means, you know, the one that has a noble heart only believes that the world is one family. How do you create these noble hearts? And that is the larger concept of internationalization. So when we talk about internationalization, many a times you talk about collaborations between two universities. You talk about, you know, how do your students go abroad for a semester? How do you develop dual programs, twinning programs? Well, these are process driven things that you definitely need to do when you talk about internationalization. But why do you do that? What for do you do that? So some universities believe that internationalization is all about a commercial angle of bringing in foreign students and the money, but it's not that. I mean, India has been attracting foreign students, as I said, in Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila, all those large universities that were created, you know, thousands of years ago. For what? For bringing in this kind of diversity, so that India was considered as a land of, you know, as a land that accepts, you know, this kind of diversity, accepts people from all across the world. And that is that old heritage that we need to bring in back. So you know, numbers don't matter at all. I mean, whether you have 47,000 students or 200,000 foreign students in your country really don't matter. What matters is how well do your Indian students accept foreign students, how well do your Indian students accept Afro-Asian students. Vasudha, I'll tell you some horrendous stories. You know, in 1970, when my father established Symbiosis, you know, he realized that the Pune citizens, or the people from Pune, were not accepting these Afro-Asian students. Why? Because African students are black. The stories that African students told my father, and he used to publish these stories in the regional newspaper called Kesari, started by Lokmanya Tilak. Every Sunday there used to be an interview of a foreign student, because he wanted to sensitize Pune people that these are the same foreign students who will go back to their countries, assume top positions in their countries. They are our unofficial ambassadors of goodwill. So you need to accept them. You need to give them a platform that they feel very inclusive about, because these are the memories that they're going to carry back home when they go. And the stories that African students said was that if I wake up in the morning and go to the toilet, all my batchmates in the hostel rooms close their doors and windows. Why? Because they don't want to see a black face early morning. An African student would tell my father that if I'm traveling in a public transport bus, if a seat next to me is vacant, nobody would want to sit next to me, simply because I'm black and they feel I'm not from their country. So while we welcomed all these Goras, you know, the Americans and the Europeans, we did not want to welcome the Africans and, you know, people who came from the Muslim speaking or the Islamic countries. Why? Because they were different from us. I mean, this kind of cultural insensitization and this kind of, you know, exclusion is not accepted, you know, in a world which is globalized, you know, a world which should be secular, a world which should be of different men and women of different cultures coming together. Internationalization finds its most importance. And I think the pandemic, Vasudha, has taught us so much that it's all about collaboration. It's all about bringing people together. It's about bringing organizations together. It's about bringing countries together to find a solution to this pandemic. And I'm sure no single country can really find a solution. So even if you see the vaccines being developed, you have a Serum Institute here right in Pune, which collaborated with AstraZeneca and Oxford universities. This was a big collaboration, a global collaboration that brought in even a vaccine against this deadly pandemic. So I always feel that something that Dr. Majumdar thought of 50 years ago, you know, is coming so true now. And will continue to be the truth, you know, in the world, where we definitely need to understand that these are our brothers and sisters, you know, no matter from which country, from which region, from which religion they come. And I think the larger sense of a university is to teach our young students this concept through the process of internationalization, than really just talk about academics and, you know, employment.
No, absolutely, and thank you so much for sharing that powerful message with our audience today, because, you know, that is something that is not talked about enough. It's not addressed enough. And, you know, people think that because we are also suppressed by other cultures, it's somehow justified, or maybe that it's not as bad because, oh, we go through it, therefore it's okay that you do it. There's all these kinds of misconceptions that have very serious impacts on other people's lives that we do not take into account. And thank you so much for speaking about that on internationalization of education. That's something that is not definitely not discussed at the depth that it should be. And I had a lot of more questions I wanted to ask you, like, you know, what do you think are the biggest lessons we got from the pandemic, but I think you have kind of run through all of that. So I would like to just ask one final question, like, what is your philosophy? What is your leading philosophy that for education?
A philosophy for education?
Yes.
I think I've just spoken about it personally.
Yeah. I think you've answered all my questions more or less.
Sorry for that, or maybe
No, not at all. I'm so glad I was listening the entire time.
yes. So I think the philosophy, I would say it's my philosophy, but I always feel that what is education all about? Is it really to prepare students to get a job, or is it far beyond this? And I, for one, believe that it's far more than just preparation for a job. Job is a byproduct. Employability is really a byproduct of what we prepare our students for, and therefore to prepare your students to this kind of this kind of concept of accepting different cultures, different religions is one area of education. The other is also to see the needs of the society. When you talk about education, research goes hand in hand, right? But if you do research in laboratories that really is not useful to the society, what have you really contributed for? So whatever you do in a university finally has to have an impact in the community, in the neighborhood, for the society. And therefore I think to change the mindset of these people who come to us at a very raw age of 17 and 18, I think as educationists, as universities, we really can transform lives. And I see this happening almost every day when parents come back and say that I can't recognize my own son or daughter after 6 months. The kind of confidence, the kind of communication skills that you have instilled, and more importantly, the change in mindset of accepting diversity, that's far more important. So I feel education is far beyond training, beyond employability. I think education is creating good men and women with a feeling of global citizenship, with a feeling of sensitivity to the needs of the society. I think it's that. Then really focusing on the skills, on the training, on the employment, that will happen if you create good human beings with the right kind of values. You will get a job no matter what, where you want to pursue it. Because today when I hire people, Vasudha, what I see is not so much of their skills and competencies, but what I see in them is their character. I mean, the character, the values, the sanskars, because those are the people that will stay with me for long. And the people who have just hardcore competencies but not great characters, they'll just hop from one job to the other. Do universities create such people, or people with the kind of thought leadership and the global citizenship that will stay with them as so universities have to build characters of young men and women.
Absolutely. I mean, it comes back to this whole concept of holistic education that we're trying to impart, and that's not just about courses, it's about the mindset, it's about the principles that a university is built on, and the ones that your educators impart on students, and what students can bring to the educators as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Vidya, for joining us today on our Wednesday Wisdom platform. We are absolutely honored to have you here. This was such an interesting and this eye-opening conversation, and so many things that I hadn't even thought about had come up. Anyone who is interested in rewatching this dialogue can do that on any of your favorite social media platforms, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as bweducation.com, our website. And next week, we have the Vice Chancellor of Shibnagor University, Dr. Ghosh, joining us, and you can register now to watch that live. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Vidya, and have a great day ahead of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vasudha. And please thank Dr. Anurag Batra also. It was a pleasure interacting with you on this platform.